Bryant and Tim Duncan. At least that's what the stats show. Duncan led the Spurs to their first title and a total of 5 over the last 16 years. 3 finals MVPs and 2 regular season MVPs, while Kobe also has 5 titles, 2 finals, 1 regular. But their individual accomplishments, as you can see, are almost identical. That's why we ask this question. Who do you believe has had the better career? Something we should let simmer. Who's had the better career? It's a tough one, Stephen A., so we give it to you.
You know something? Sports is a results-oriented business. So if you're simply going by the results, I understand there are those who would say Tim Duncan. Don't blame him, can't refute it. Tim Duncan came into the league the same time as Kobe Bryant. What people need to understand is that Tim Duncan has never won less than 50 games in any season except the lockout shortened season when there were only 50 games in a season. And that year he won 37. This is just nothing short of phenomenal. Since this man has arrived on the scene for the San Antonio Spurs, they have consistently, for more than 15 years, been a contender. On that premise, the nod goes to Tim Duncan. But here's where my boy Champ in Detroit, my man, the radio host that the sports writer Mayberry in Oklahoma City introduced me to when they were raving about Kobe. Here's where they have a point. Kobe has just as many rings as Tim Duncan, even though 3 of them were with Shaq. But the change, you know, not having Phil, having to be a part of a rebuilding process, having Jim Buss as your owner, changing systems, having to deal with Rudy Tomjanovich one day and Mike D'Antoni the next and Mike Brown and having to play point guard, small forward, you know, as well as shooting guard, having to score, having to defend in the backcourt against some of the best players. And somehow, some way, you still end up with just as many rings as Tim Duncan, having to go through the soap opera that he had to go through with Shaq and all of those boys. I mean, the list went on and on. Kobe had adversity he overcame. So if you look at it from that standpoint, I got to give the nod to Kobe. But if you want to sit there and say, well, consistency, record, then of course it goes to Duncan. But one would argue, well, damn, Greg Popovich's been there since the day Tim Duncan arrived. Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker weren't far behind. The Spurs are a first-class organization. They've been an incredible model of consistency, and there has been nothing that they have encountered that rocked the boat from an organizational standpoint. It is as close to tranquility as you can get in professional sports as far as I'm concerned. And to me, that's something that Tim Duncan has enjoyed that Kobe has never enjoyed. So in the end, I'm going to have to take that in consideration, and I'm going to have to give the nod to Kobe.
Just because Champ talked you out of it?
Well, that's part of it. I mean, Champ knows his basketball. That's my boy. You know, he knows his basketball. He ain't the only one.
We know
he ain't the only one,
going.
but I mean, it's going back and forth. It's going back and forth.
Apologies to Champ, and apologies to Carrie, and apologies to many, many of our younger viewers who are going to say what I'm about to say is blasphemous.
And the radio host in Oklahoma City, not forgetting you.
Don't forget.
Don't forget him, because he was arguing for about a half hour.
Yeah, and my grandmother, she's going to be upset.
Darnell Mayberry's boy. Yes.
Okay.
He made good points.
All those apologies. I apologize to all of them. Tim Duncan has had a little better career than Kobe Bryant has. And the reason for that tranquility in San Antonio, the reason there has been no boat rocking in San Antonio, is the rock that has been Tim Duncan. There has been no change because Tim Duncan never changes. And I'm going to boil it down for you, and you mentioned this. Kobe won 3 of his rings alongside Shaquille O'Neal. Now, it's highly debatable who was more valuable, especially in their 3rd championship season. But I'm going to say that Shaq was a little more valuable as a driving force than Shaq was. Just a little more valuable. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
Tim Duncan has been the driving force and the leader of all 5 Spurs championship teams. And if Tim Duncan had won MVP of this year's finals, I would have had no problem with it. I was fine. I was happy for Kawhi. But I made the point to you on yesterday's show. Man, I thought Tim Duncan at least should have shared part of that MVP. His rim protection against LeBron was extraordinary in this season. I can't show you block shots, but I can show you a bunch of altered shots. That has been the case for year after year after year. They all follow Tim's lead. Now, even as the Spurs supporter on this show, I'll be the first to admit to you, if I have to pay money to watch Kobe or pay money to watch Tim, I'm paying money to watch Kobe Bean Bryant. I got to tell you, if I have a choice on TV, even though I love watching my Spurs, if Kobe's, I don't know, I'm going to watch Kobe. Who doesn't want to watch Kobe? He is, to quote you, box office. He might be the greatest box office, well, he's the greatest since just Michael, obviously, Michael Jordan. But in the end, Stephen A., I look at what Tim does, and it doesn't translate. I've called him often on this show the most boring superstar in the history of sports. He has no edge to him. He doesn't pick fights. He doesn't feud with rival players. He barely says anything. For him to say, what was it, this time we're going to do it to start this series? That was shocking. That was like, what? Tim Duncan said they're going to do it? Go ahead.
But Skip, but all I'm trying to say to you is this. I'm not refuting your position if all we're talking about are results. But if you want to do it like that, nobody can compete with that. Tim Duncan hasn't won less than 50 games, just like I said. The issue is that I'm taking into account the adversity and the roller coaster ride created by the players, created by the organization, created by ownership, going back and forth. I'm taking all of those things into consideration. The rise, the fall. I remember when the Lakers were going for their first title and Shaq fouled out. I remember how Kobe had to come to the rescue, okay, in his first NBA Finals when he put on that show in game five. I think it was game 5 or game 4, whatever game it was, against Indiana. I'm thinking about game 7 of Sacramento, the year that they ended up beating the Nets when they went to a 7-game series and Kobe was there. There were moments. Don't get me wrong. Shaq is the most dominant force of the modern day era. He's the diesel. You know how I feel about Shaq. But you needed Kobe in the fourth quarter because Shaq struggled with free throws. And it was Kobe who was handed the ball. And it was Kobe who was asked to deliver. It was Kobe who had to play point sometimes. It was Kobe who had to go out there and defend against the best player. And then after Shaq was gone, they had to plummet. And then all of a sudden you're building it back up. And in the meantime, he's doing everything that he's doing. I'm like, wait a minute. If you're just talking about record, of course it's Tim Duncan. But if you're talking about having to overcome adversity and still end up with what Tim Duncan has, I don't think you can summarily dismiss what Kobe has achieved.
Two people at once. I'm getting it from this direction and this direction.
Because Stephen A., you're right. He didn't have pop. He didn't have that stability.
Okay, but time out. Do you remember, help me out, which year it was? Was it the 2000 Western Conference Finals? I was there. I'm pretty sure you were there. When Shaquille O'Neal made ragdolls out of Tim Duncan and David Robinson. Which year was it? I was there. It was just a mismatch because Shaq was indefensible. And the other quick... Okay, you talk about all the adversity Kobe went through, and again, I love Kobe, but he caused a lot of it himself. Am I right? He did.
To some degree,
did he not?
But Skip, what I'm saying is, what adversity did Tim Duncan go through? That's all I'm saying.
Because he's the leader of the team. There was none because none emanated from the leader of the franchise.
But wait a minute. What if they had changed the coach?
They didn't have to because Tim Duncan was too good. They didn't need a new coach.
Wait a minute. They had to change the coach in Chicago because Krause and those boys didn't want Phil there, and they were winning titles.
Come on.
What are you talking about? It happens.
You mean
it happens?
Change
Detroit went to won an NBA Finals and then went and lost Game 7 to San Antonio, and they replaced Larry Brown.
Okay.
Phil was in the finals against Boston and those boys, and they still wanted him going and wanted somebody new. It happens.
Okay, but
it didn't happen to Tim.
Maybe this is overstated, but didn't Kobe quote unquote run Shaq out of town? Did he not?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, there's no question about that.
Okay.
There's no question about that. With Bus. Dr. Bus was willing to do it, but Kobe certainly wanted that to happen. Wanted that to happen at the time.
Sorry. Sorry, champ. Good try.
2001 Western Conference Finals are what you're referring to when Shaq
2001. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Ragdolls.
Yeah, thank you.
Of Duncan. All right. Kobe, we love you. Skip and Stephen A. have presented their positions on this debate. Obviously, Skip has gone with Tim Duncan. Stephen A.